Welcome, listeners, to a brand new bonus episode of Oh My Word podcast. And today, we have a very, very exciting guest with us. Today, we have Wendy Loggia, who is the Senior Executive Editor at Delacorte Press. Wendy, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and talk about one of my favorite things, which is publishing.
Yay, me too. I'm very excited. So let's just dive right into it. How does one become a senior editor at Delacorte Press? How did you even get here?
It's my path, I would say, is a pretty traditional path, but also a different path than many younger staff members today, because when I started in publishing, there was no internet. So finding job listings was definitely a bit of a challenge. But to back up a little bit, I grew up a lover of books, a lover of reading. I worked in a Walden Books, and I worked in an independent bookstore when I was in high school. I majored in English in college, and then attended the NYU Summer Publishing Institute in New York, which was really a great opportunity for me to have an introduction to the city and learn how to sort of network and meet some really key players in the industry. I applied for many jobs after that, and as luck would have it, I ended up at Grosset and Dunlap, which right now is actually part of the Penguin Random House family. So it's sort of a full circle moment.
Right.
But at Grosset, I started out in the managing editorial department, and then a few years later transitioned over into strictly editorial, which is where I've been ever since.
Wow. Just to back up a second, from the outset, you always wanted to be in books. There was always a focus or a goal to be part of the book world or the writing world?
I always wanted to be involved with books, but I didn't know what that would look like.
Okay.
I grew up in a small town and, always surrounded myself with books and reading, but I didn't really know what jobs existed in publishing. And I actually was going to go to law school and had turned in my deposit and was planning on going to law school. And then about 2 weeks before I was set to move in, I just, my cold feet took over and I backed out and never looked back. But yeah, I didn't really know about all the different jobs and opportunities that were in publishing. And I think that's something today that still exists and that I love to talk about and share with people who really have a love of reading and being creative and would be able to thrive in publishing if they knew about the different opportunities that exist.
Right, that's so true. Because I think everyone thinks that there's the writer and there's a book, and that's the entire process.
Yes, it's a whole village of us. And now the village sort of extends around the world that we've all been working remote this past year. So I think that also opens up doors that perhaps were closed in the past as far as bringing in new people that might not have been able to live in New York City on a notoriously low publishing salary.
Right. Now that you mentioned it, even though we're sort of skipping ahead, do you have a lot of contact with branches that are outside of the United States? Does your department fall into that or not necessarily?
No, not really. So certainly Penguin Random House is a global publisher, but we really focus really here in the United States. We certainly have great relationships with our colleagues across the pond and often share ideas and news about books that we're working on. But no, we're really strictly focused here in the U.S. market.
Right. And I just gotta ask, because sometimes when people hear that someone's a writer, the immediate reaction is always like, okay, so what's your real job? Or like, okay, like that's not, do you get that as a publisher and as an editor, or people like, no, editing and publishing is real work and writing is just like, okay, find yourself a job, or not necessarily?
I think not so much me, but I do feel very protective of my authors who I know hear comments like that on a fairly often basis. So I do feel very protective of them. And I also think there's a bit of a misconception when if people hear I work at Random House Children's Books, I think there's an immediate recognition of Random House, but also sort of the idea that working in children's books would be really sort of easy and a skip through the park, which I hate to break it, isn't always the case.
Yeah.
So I think there is a bit of ignorance out there as to what actually goes on in a children's book publisher.
Yeah. I've heard it from an author before that she writes for young adults and she writes for adults. And she says a lot of people didn't really recognize her as an author until she started writing for adults. Because they said young adults is not real writing. And it's like, do you know how much work goes into this?
Yeah, I mean, I think too, the authors that I work with, I think they're professionals and they treat writing like a job, which it is. So I think authors who do that usually tend to have the most success because it is, it definitely is a job, it is a career, and there's a lot of time to be put into it.
Right. We're going to end up just skipping all over now just because you're mentioning certain things that I figured I'd ask later, but you brought up here, so maybe I'll talk about it now. With certain writers that you have that you're speaking about, the ones who do treat it as a career, which assuming that it's most of them that you have, is there any thought sometimes when you're looking to taking on a project by a writer who you haven't worked with before, and you have the one writer who might have a larger library of stuff that's already out, showing more that there's someone who's consistently working on things versus someone who puts something out maybe every couple of years, so they're not producing as much, but maybe their work might be a little bit better. Does that come into consideration when you're looking at writers, or not necessarily?
No, I don't think so. I think more what would happen is, if somebody is a debut, they have no book history. But if someone has published, we definitely do look at their sales numbers for their previous books. And we also know that those numbers aren't always reflective of the true picture. So while we can look up sales on BookScan and see an author's track record, and that track record does stay with that author, we don't necessarily, somebody who has sold incredibly well is always of interest, but there also might be a reason why a certain book did perform in a certain way. And consequently, if an author's track record is really low, that also doesn't mean that I wouldn't consider projects from that author. I think there's just a lot of context that needs to be had, and that's why I'm a big believer in asking agents for information and having questions about projects that come in so we get a full picture, and it's not something that's just based on a quick look at BookScan numbers. And personally, I wouldn't really look at somebody who had published something 5 years ago and compare them to somebody who has published a book a year. That wouldn't really come into play for me. It would be more about this project that they've written now and what the publishing schedule would look like for that. I wouldn't really care, what kind of writing schedule they were on in the past, unless, I will add a caveat, unless it's for something that we're looking to publish really quickly. I work on a paperback line, and those books come out very quickly, and we're on an accelerated schedule. So the writers that I work with for those books need to be able to create really high quality content at a fairly fast clip, just by the nature of the publishing schedule we're on. But that's very separate from our traditional Delacorte Press middle grade hardcover line, where the books can take as long as they need to bake in the oven. We don't want to take them out before they're ready.
Right. So just to confirm, the paperback line that you mentioned, that's books that are published right away in paperback.
That's correct.
Okay.
We launched this past July, so July 2020, we launched an original trade paperback program called Underlined, and it focuses on 3 specific genres: horror, thriller, and romance. And so we're very genre focused. And because we're publishing 1 book a month, we're really on an accelerated schedule. So those books, they sort of operate in their own little realm, separate from the regular Delacorte line and schedules.
Oh, so 1 book a month. What does your traditional line look like?
So with our Delacorte books, that can vary. Right now, we're working on our spring, summer, and fall 22 list.
Wow.
And it really just depends. Every editor has a different number of books. We don't have a set number of books that we're required to work on.
Okay.
So it really depends on what books come in, what we respond to, what we end up eventually acquiring. And then, some books might need one revision, some books might need multiple revisions. So it's really about getting the book ready. And so that means the list can always be a little fluid up to a certain point. Our spring 22 list and our summer 22 list are really pretty much closed at this point. So
Wow.
our fall list is what we're looking and what we can still add titles to. And then we'll be into 2023, which I can't even believe. But my personal list, I usually edit anywhere from 3 to 6 Delacorte novels a season. And we have 3 seasons: spring, summer, and fall.
Oh, how come winter gets kicked out?
I know. I don't know why. I think initially we just had spring and fall, and then we added summer. So yes, spring is very optimistic. The spring list is January through April. So we're in spring right now, even though the calendar doesn't tell us that. And then the summer list is May through August, and fall is September through December. At least at Random House, that's how our calendar works.
It's funny when you say 2023, it sounds so futuristic.
It does. Sometimes I have to look at the calendar to actually remember what month and year we're in, because we talk, our day is spent talking about months and times so far into the future that I have to think, wait, what years? Oh, this is 2021. At least it's not 2020 anymore. But yes, we're always throwing out dates that are far, far ahead.
On an average, are you seeing those books up until the moment of print, or by the time they're coming out, you've already finished work on those? Like your job's already been done in them for a few months already, and then you're already on to the next. Marketing takes over there.
Well, we have our fingers on the book really throughout its history, pre-pub and after pub. And you're working on books that are coming out right now. You're working on books that are still being developed, and then you're acquiring new books. So you're always in sort of this liminal space between all different projects. But for projects, like I have books that are coming out, let's say this month or in April. Obviously the editing is done, the covers are done, all
Right.
of those aspects of the bookmaking process are complete. But now we're seeing social media assets might be created, or there might be book trailers that I'm involved with, or there might be special mailings that are happening, or interviews that the authors are doing. So I'm still very much involved, although I'm more maybe on the side watching those things take place and stepping in to give my 2 cents if it's asked for, or if I feel like I need to give it. But at this point, yes, the marketing publicity sides are taking over, but the editor is always the book's biggest and the author's biggest advocate. So we love being looped in on everything and being able to kind of raise our hand. I just this morning gave the thumbs up to a book trailer for a book of mine. It's been a book trailer that's been in development, and now we're ready to go, and that book goes on sale next month. So still involved, but not with the actual editing, but more sort of all the bells and whistles and things that go along with the book. So that's really fun.
At that point, you kind of become more of like a supervisor?
No, I think I'm the one in-house that knows the book best.
Right.
So our teams all want to work together and sort of, as we say, hold hands together and make sure everything is right in the way we all want it, and that the vision, I like to think of myself as having the editorial vision, but also working hand in hand with my authors to make sure that, I'm their representative at Random House. So
yeah.
I want to make sure that I'm giving the thumbs up to things that they would be happy with. And we loop authors and agents in on almost every aspect. There are, of course, some things where, I'm going to be the voice and I'm going to be the one who says yes or no, or, oh, I love this, or could we do this? Last week we had somebody pulled a quote for a marketing campaign and needed to verify the quote from the book. And because we're not in the office, we didn't have the physical books. This was a book that came out a few years ago, but luckily I have a library in my house. So I ran and got the book and was able to verify the quote. So little things like that kind of come up. Every day is different, I will say that. So you never know what is going to come down the road, but that's what makes it so much fun.
And then do you have a lot of say, aside from I approve this, or I think this is a good idea or not a good idea in the actual the marketing or the covers or things like that. And it's more like you let the department do their thing and then you kind of give approval or like your little suggestions at that point.
It really depends. So, I can speak to the cover. That's probably where we are most involved. So, for every book that we acquire on our list, we create a cover memo for the book. And the cover memo has all the information about the book, the author, the author's history. If the author has written any other books, we show what those book covers were, the genre, the pub season, all of those sort of basic things. But then our cover memo also goes into what is the mood of the book? What are 5 things we want the cover to convey? Who are the readers for this book? What are books that might also appeal to a reader of this book? So if you like this book, you would like these other books. We give a plot synopsis and we give character descriptions, setting descriptions. So this cover memo can be a 10-page document, honestly.
Wow.
We show mood boards, and for every book that I work on, I try to have my authors do my work for me, and I ask them for all of this information, and I ask my authors, what covers do they love? What covers do they hate? How did they envision the cover? Is there anything they don't want to see on their cover? Is there something they hope to see? So I really love to hear what they think and artists that they admire and books that they're drawn to. And then we use that information. We create a very informative, what we hope, a very informative memo. We meet with the art department. They have all of this information. They read the projects, and then they suggest, I should say, an illustrator or a photographer that they think might be a good fit. And at that point, the editor has a conversation, and we give our thumbs up or thumbs down on those artistic choices. So we make sure that whatever illustrator is hired is somebody that we're really excited about. And then we're involved with cover sketches and cover concepts. And it takes up a lot of our time, but obviously it's hugely important to our books. So we're incredibly involved. In fact, I have one of those meetings today to talk about a book that's on our summer list, and I've done my memo, we've had our art meeting, and now I'm meeting with the designer today to hear her vision of what she is going to propose for the book. And we work so closely together and so well together. So I can't wait to have this meeting and see what sort of genius ideas she's come up with. And then I'll go back to the author and discuss with her. So it's a multi-layered process. And to answer your question about marketing and publicity, we definitely are looped in and can discuss plans and ideas with them as well. It's a little different than the cover development, but we work together, really all groups as a team and as true partners on all our books. And I think, that's sort of the secret sauce, the secret to the success of a book is really everybody working together, sharing ideas, collaborating, and being flexible and receptive to a changing marketplace that's changing by the day.
Yeah, for sure. I keep being told that in larger companies that authors don't get as much say in their cover, but it sounds like you do give, at least in the beginning, that they get a pretty loud voice in that, which sounds great.
We really do. I mean, it's hugely important. No one wants an author to be unhappy, with their cover. And I think certainly we bring a level of expertise both, with our team and as far as knowing what we're seeing working in the marketplace, knowing what books of ours are hitting or selling, keeping an eye on trends and covers and packages from other publishers. So we spend a lot of time internally on that. And so sometimes, certainly there can be differing opinions, and we try to be always respectful, but sort of share what we see and what we're knowing. But I love looping my authors in, and it's so much fun to send them sketches and to send them ideas of what we're thinking, and everything from cover type to a suggestion for what a concept might be. Today I was working on the interior for one of my books, and we're working on coming up with cute little chapter openers. And I've gone back and forth with the author a couple times today because we had one idea and then she had another idea and we tried that. It didn't quite work, but the designer came up with a genius solution and now the author loves it. So, it's just, I find sort of having those conversations and getting that feedback early on just ends up making the whole process a much happier one, and who doesn't want a happy author, happy editor, happy designer, we get the best work that way. So
absolutely. For writers, the agents are gatekeepers kind of to you. And we know agents can see thousands, hundreds and thousands of queries in a month or a year. How many, I guess it's also queries for you also. I guess if agents are trying to submit to you, that's a bunch of queries also. About how many do you see on a month or a year?
I did a tally, I think a year ago or maybe it was 2 years ago. I counted up all the manuscripts that I actually had received in a year, and I think it was around 200.
Wow!
But this year, I think because I've done a few more public outreach tweets on social media about projects I'm looking for, I'm seeing just a lot. I mean, this last week alone, maybe I received 60 to 70 agent queries, pitches.
Wow.
So I'm still going through those just to see what I like to get back, at least on that initial query pretty quickly. But I also have so many books I have to edit. So I think today I'm not going to look at anything else, but the last few weeks has been really busy just because I put out sort of an open call for paperbacks, and that has really, I sort of underestimated how many queries I was going to get, which has been great. It's been really terrific. We're seeing so many exciting projects, but it kind of hit my inbox a bit hard. But yeah, I would say a typical week, sort of this paperback rush aside, I would say, I don't know, in a day I might get anywhere from none to maybe 6 pitches a day. I mean, 0 to 6, maybe somewhere in there.
Right.
It's kind of a typical day.
And let's say you've got your 200 manuscripts that you've tallied. Those are the 200 you've actually requested, which means you have to fully read 200 manuscripts a year. Or there are points where you'll, like halfway through, you're like, I'm not feeling it. And or you know how to speed read it.
I have just a stellar group of people that work with me, and my assistant is just an incredible, fast, insightful reader. So she does a lot of my first reads just to see if the writing sparks her eye, if she likes the concept, if it just sounds like a book that would do well on our list. So she does a lot of that, and I do too. Like, I think it's easy for me to quickly look at a query and say, oh, this is a genre that I personally am just not. I'm not a real epic fantasy person. So if something is very heavy, high fantasy, I tend not to gravitate toward that. Or if something is historical fiction, it would have to be really special for me to want to read that, just because while I love historical fiction as a reader, we've seen it kind of have a bumpy road in the marketplace. So certain projects, somebody might pitch a picture book to me, which I don't do, or a nonfiction. So those are really easy to quickly say, this isn't for us. But it's the ones then that I think, this could be, and I might dip in and I think, I like this. And I might send it to my assistant and say, I read the first few pages. I think there's something here. What do you think? Or, I don't know, I didn't really love the writing, but I love the concept. Can you read 20 pages and see what you think? So to answer your question, we are not reading all manuscripts all the way through. It would be impossible for us to do that. But we read enough that we feel like we know whether we like it or not. And sometimes the plot or the pacing might not be great, but we love the writing,
Right.
And so it's easy to fix plotting and pacing. It's harder to fix writing,
Yeah. So that's where you come in. Once you do take the manuscript, your job now is to make sure that the story is, like, what's your main editing? Is logic or just the flow of the story? What's sort of the main, because you're not proofreading it and you're not copy editing. So what do you do as an editor once you have the manuscript?
I like to sort of think of us as creative, story shapers. And when I read something for submission, I read it first as as a fan, as a reader, as somebody who's just reading something to see like, ooh, what is this story? What is this world and voice and place? Let me see where I can travel in this, in this submission, where I can go in my mind. And then if I like it, I sort of read it with a more critical eye now, thinking like, let me pick it apart now. What don't I like about this?
Right.
I think everything from sort of developmental line edits to helping an author maybe reshape their plot, to tighten the prose, to increase the stakes. Like, we really read things and really try to make the project the best it can be. And sometimes that is, the characters are not all fully dimensional, or there's a plot that just we think is completely outlandish that isn't serving the story. And often this past week I've made a few offers on projects, and I always like to tell an agent what I love, what I think is great, and also to say, like, these are the things that I think might need to be done. These are this plot element I don't think needs to be here, or there was the writing got really flowery at this part, and I'm wondering how the author feels. And I try to give very general suggestions of what I think needs to be done. I recently had a project where I had some specific ideas of what I thought needed to be done, and the author felt differently. Like, she felt that she didn't want to make those changes, and that was fine, totally her prerogative. But we agreed we probably wouldn't be the best partners on this project because we just had really different ideas. So I think it's really important to sort of communicate. Communication is always the key to everything, and to just sort of share those thoughts, because I never would want to work on a project or send somebody up and we just have very different ideas about what the book could be, and also what might be. And I'm not always right, I'm certainly not always right. I think it's all about just finding that perfect match, with the editor author, and this author might sell this book somewhere else and it might become just a super read, not with the feedback I suggested, so I think it's more about finding, feeling like what I think, what an author thinks, and if we can find that intersection, that's great. But I like to communicate those things up front, before we even get started, just to make sure we're all on the same page.
So that sort of preempts the question. So when you're making the offer, you'll also say, these are the changes I'd like to see worked on, and if they can agree to that, then the offer can keep going. But if they're like, no, we're not changing that, then it's like, okay, then we're not the best fit for it. It's sort of what occurs.
Yeah, okay. Pretty much. I mean, I think it's just important to have that conversation to say, like, these are the things that I would love you to work on, and these are things that I think you might want to think about. And sometimes there are things that I certainly don't have the answer to, but I might know, like, there's something not right. The pacing here is not right, or this particular plot point isn't quite there, and I don't necessarily know how to fix it, but I know it's not quite right. So maybe it's something we can talk about. And often, I think sometimes the best feedback is when an author will say, like, I've been struggling with that. Yes, I'm so glad you identified that. Or, yes, this is something that I've reworked a lot, and I'm eager to continue the conversation to figure out how to fix it. Or I'm open to those changes. Those are always really exciting conversations to have.
Yeah. So it seems like sometimes it could be, this plot point needs to be changed. Here's sort of how I'm seeing it. What do you think? And the author could come back with something else that still changes the plot point, but it might not exactly be what you suggested.
Yeah, I mean, often we just throw out a lot of ideas, a lot of questions, and a lot of, during the editorial process, I think it's a lot of, like, you could do this, or maybe you could do this, or maybe you'll do none of these things, but maybe just these ideas alone will spur you to think of something else.
Yeah.
So I think we're big question askers, and we're not always answer givers. It's sort of like to plant those seeds, like, oh, did you ever think of this? Or would the character do this? Or what do you think about restructuring and opening with this scene instead? And we're just there to try to, I just recently, I think it was on the, at the SCBWI Midwinter Conference, I know I talked a little bit about seeing a book. It's almost like that piece of marble that you're chiseling, and the book is in there. You just have to kind of find it. So I view our relationship with our authors and books in that way, that, you try to make the book the story that it was meant to be, and that the author really intended it to be. And sometimes it just takes maybe some outside feedback and back and forth to get the book to that place.
Yeah. Because writers, because you're so involved in your project, you have blinders a lot on. So you need someone to like get you past the blinders.
That is for sure true. And we're all like that. I mean, I think I love writing cover copy, but sometimes I'll write cover copy and I'll think, it's not great, but I've kind of hit a wall. So I might send it to a fellow editor, or I'll send it to the author. I always send cover copy to the author, and they inevitably will make it better. I think it's a lot easier for somebody outside to step in and give suggestions and sort of add that little final polish. If I've stared at this cover copy for a week, I might not be able to do anything with it, and then somebody will make a tweak, and I'll think, that's perfect. Why didn't I think of that?
And once you do sign an author, do you always, or almost always, especially if you've had a good working relationship, do you almost always try to get whatever they're working on next, as long as it fits the catalog?
Yes. So we, in most instances, would have an option to their next book, and it might be a very wide option. So it's the option to their next YA novel if they're writing in YA. Or it might be more specific if they publish with other houses and this is a specific project they're working on for us. So it might be an option to their next middle grade sci-fi story.
Right.
But my philosophy is that we're acquiring books, but we're acquiring authors, and we want long relationships with the talented people that we bring onto our list.
Yeah.
And we see it as a career. We don't like to just look at one book. We like to have that sort of vision of where, ideally each book, it's always an author's book is next best book is ahead of them. Like, we like to just keep thinking to the future. So yes, that the goal is to keep working together.
That actually, sometimes people ask me, what's my favorite book? And I'll say whichever one I'm working on now. Because I'd like to think it's better work than whatever I did. Not because I don't like other things. So just as a quick thing, how do you keep track between all the books that you're working on and all the books that are already out there? How do you keep track of everything? And how much do you actually have to know? Do you have to actually read those books, especially ones that are with other houses, versus just know about what's going on? How do you balance that?
I mean, I think that's a challenge.
Yeah.
I think we try to be very on top of marketplace trends and books. We at Delacour are really wonderful colleagues of one another, and we share things constantly. So we have a group text chat where we share everything from a cover that we see that we love to an ad campaign that we love to somebody's in a bookstore and sees a really cool jacket. They take a photo of it and send it to the group. So we're always talking and looking in that way. But we also have divisional presentations where it might be a presentation. Last week I attended one on TikTok and what's trending on TikTok. So there certainly are colleagues at Random House who are focused on marketplace and marketing and publicity and what they're seeing on digital social media. So I don't think any one person can do it all, but we try to stay as informed and share our knowledge with everybody else. And, I'm always looking at the bestseller list. I'm a book consumer myself. I go to the bookstore now, maybe not quite as frequently as pre-COVID, but I do try to go to walk around to look at the tables to see what's catching my eye, to read just any trade coverage that I see of my books, of books that I see on Good Morning America. I like to just be a consumer of book knowledge in that way. Do I read a lot of competition? Not as much probably as I'd like to, because I'm so busy reading my own books. And I do say I like to read my colleagues' books. So if Knopf has a YA that's coming out that's getting a lot of attention, I might want to read it. If I sit through a list, what we call a list launch meeting, and that's an exciting meeting at Random House Kids. It's where all the editors present the books on their upcoming list. We just had our launch. When was it? Time eludes me. We had our launch for spring 22, and there were books that as I was listening to them being pitched and presented, I was like, oh, that sounds so good. So I would jot down the manuscripts that I was like, oh, I want to read this one and this one. And so it's really fun, and after the meeting, I might get emails from colleagues that say, oh, I loved the book that you've talked about. That sounds so great. And so we try to stay, on top of what's happening within Random House. But then also just in the industry, we have friends. Publishing is a small world, so we might have an editor friend at another house who might say, oh, you have to read this book that I'm working on. It's so great, or sending each other arcs or things like that. It's a little different now that we're all remote, not quite as easy, but we try to stay abreast of what's happening out there.
Yeah, because there's so much good stuff, which is great. But yeah. So just probably got like 2 more questions before we wrap up. I actually would keep you on the phone for forever, but I think that might not be the best idea. How much do you look at, just because you mentioned social media a few times, how much do you look at an author's social media, or how important it is it to you? Because I've spoken to 2 agents who both said that the social media can always be built and always be done. So nonfiction seems to be much more important. But when you're acquiring or looking into an author, how much do you actually look at their social media or see if they have it?
I know this is a really hot topic. I know. So my personal MO is I do look at, I always want to know, is this author on Facebook? Are they on Twitter? Are they on Instagram? Sort of where are they? I like to see what their following is. It's not going to make or break whether I make an offer on a book. But I just like to sort of learn a little bit about an author. I think I'm a pretty positive person. And I tend to shy away from people that are really negative on social media. And I also like to see, are they active in the author community? Do they know other writers? That's not to say that is at all a factor in acquisition. I made an offer on a project and the author wasn't on social media at all. And that was fine. And then I've made offers on projects recently where the authors have really nice social media followings. I think it's something that each author has to be comfortable with. I don't think I'm at all in a position to say you need to be on this platform in order to promote your book. I will say it definitely helps. I see authors that are really great on social media who are doing wonderful things to get the word out about their books, and no denying that is a huge asset. I know it's sort of a hot topic of publishers expecting a lot from authors in that regard. I think most importantly, the authors need the time and space to write and to focus on why we're in this business, which is the book business. But I do think certainly a nice, robust social media presence doesn't hurt, but it's not the end all be all. And again, as I said, I like to think of myself as a positive person, and I want to work with people I want to work with, really. I think this happened many years ago, but I remember reading some social media posts by an author that I was considering, and this author had trashed like every single editor that they had worked with in the past. And I just felt like, I just probably don't need this in my professional life. So probably not the project for me to work on. So things like that tend to, that would be a red flag for me.
I think people just get intimidated, especially if they're a little bit older, they didn't grow up with social media. It just seems overwhelming. But it seems like as long as you stay positive, if you do it, then you should be okay.
Sure. I mean, I think, certainly there are authors like Suzanne Collins, The Hunger Games. I don't think she has any social media. It certainly hasn't hurt Suzanne.
Right.
So,
exactly.
I don't think you need it. But I think if it's something that you enjoy doing, that you have fun with, that is natural to you, that's great. If I think authors who say, I don't like Twitter, but I love Instagram, or I love Instagram, but I don't like Facebook, whatever it is. And then just be consistent and positive, and just think about, it's a great way to connect with other creators, other authors, to kind of learn about what's going on in the business, and to promote. How much that sort of promotion actually translates into book sales, who knows? But it can be a nice component of the entire program, publishing program.
And then I'm sure this is not such a quick question, but just to ask it in a first, as simple an answer as you can give, how does it work? How do imprints work? So it seems like you might have your parent company, your Delacorp, which is part of Random House Kids, which is part of Penguin Random House. So it seems like you're almost a bunch of conglomerates that are together under this big umbrella company, or what is an imprint?
So, an imprint has a specific identity within the publishing house. So, Delacorte is an imprint comprised of middle grade and YA fiction, occasional nonfiction. We're sort of known as a place where we publish very commercial books, we publish literary books, and sometimes the two intersect and we publish commercial literary books.
Yeah.
But I think it gives us an identity to the agent community, so they know Delacorte is a place that is known for wonderful series franchise publishing. We publish thrillers really well. I think the last week's New York Times list had 2, if not 3, of our thrillers on the hardcover list.
Wow.
So we're really known for certain things, and we have that identity. Another imprint might be known for more of nonfiction, or there might be a picture book imprint, or an imprint that really focuses on reads for younger kids. The Random House imprint at Random House is known for Junie B. Jones and Magic Treehouse, these very successful early chapter book series for kids. So we all operate in our own little bubbles. I think we all know what we're good at. It can seem a little overwhelming, I think, to the outside world. Like, what is Knopf? What is Random House? What is, Random House Graphics? But we do have sort of specific identities that I think help position us within all of Random House Kids, and certain projects might feel like, oh, that feels like a Wendy Lamb book, or oh, that feels like a Doubleday picture book, that sort of thing. And really sort of the best cheating way to figure that out is, look at the New York Times list, look at what's selling on the indie bestseller list, and I think you can start to see a pattern of, oh, Delacorte has a lot of YA thrillers. I know Delacorte has really wonderful nonfiction adapted from adult bestsellers, and you can kind of start to get a sense, I think, of what people are known for. But those are very broad strokes, not very nuanced thinking. But it's kind of a quick way to get a sense of what we're all about.
Right. So an agent could submit to multiple editors at Random House if they're submitting to different imprints because they think their book might fit 1 or 2 or 3 different imprints, and then whichever editor goes for it. Something like that can happen?
It can. It gets very sticky, very tricky, I would say. So an agent can't submit to more than one editor at an imprint because that would just be counterintuitive and we wouldn't compete against each other within the Delacorte imprint. Someone can submit to multiple imprints, and that happens frequently, and it's totally fine, and that happens frequently. It makes it a little trickier if editors at 5 different imprints all like something, because then we have to internally kind of figure out what's going to happen, and we won't bid against one another. So then it can get as I said, it can get a little dicey. I mean, sometimes we just talk it through and find out one editor feels especially passionate, and so the other editors will bow out. Occasionally, we might make a house offer, and then it's up to the author and agent to decide what imprint, what editor is the best fit. I love exclusive submissions.
For sure.
For that reason. So, and I try to, if an agent is gracious enough to give me something exclusively at Random House, I try to read it really quickly. I try to prioritize those because I know, it's only with me, and I feel like I need to read it and respond quickly. And then that way it could go to someone else then if it's not for me.
Oh, I have to ask one more question before we wrap up. It says a very important question. And I don't even know how much you have to do with this, but maybe you could at least give me some insight. Why is it sometimes that when series come out, they'll change the cover design partway through the series?
Yes. Well, usually it's because we're looking to increase sales. So it's probably because the books are not selling at the level we're hoping for, and we're deciding to change. I think most often you see this when we have a hardcover series, and then it's going into paperback, and that seems like a good time to maybe refresh the cover.
Right.
And I think it can be everything from maybe changing the type, tweaking sort of the placement of the type. Maybe it can be playing with the art a little bit. It might not be a total refresh, repackage. It might just be small tweaks. Yeah. But we completely get that people love their books to match. They want them to all look the same.
Yeah.
People don't like it when books look, different on the shelf. But usually it's because we aren't seeing the sales that we think could be there, or we're getting feedback from our accounts that for whatever reason they're thinking that the cover is not best serving the book.
Okay. Because I don't mind when it changes between hardcover and paperbacks. If I'll start a series in hardcover, I'll stick to the hardcover or paperback. So at least my books are all the same. But sometimes it happens in middle of like the paperback release or middle of the hardcover release. Usually I think paperback, in middle of paperback release, sometimes it happens. And I'm like, why did you do that? You ruined the look.
It is. I agree. It's so frustrating. I did work on a trilogy where we did decide to make some tweaks, but basically it was that we wanted to make the author's name bigger. Like we kind of just wanted to make it bolder and bigger. Okay. So it's slightly tweaked. Somebody would notice if they saw it, but it was basically, we were just trying to enhance what we already had. And I think sometimes after the first book goes on sale and you're living with it for a while, you're like, we should do this, or we could do this, or, we might want to make some small adjustments, but we're very aware that, yes, that people like, and I, as a book lover myself, I like my books to all look uniform as well. So I empathize with that sentiment completely.
I'm very glad I was able to get that off my chest. That's that question. So just to wrap up, I think there's so much to talk about, but we do have to wrap up eventually. We always do the fill in the blank of, I love it when writers, agents, I guess you can even do publishers, stories, books, series, whatever, do X, and I really don't like it when they do X. Either your soapbox answer or off the top of your head.
Yeah, I love it when writers and agents think of me for their new projects, for what they're working on, and I love it when they trust me to be sort of the shepherd of their story. So I love that. I don't love it when we're not all communicating and being really, I'm a pretty open and transparent person, and I try to be really open and transparent with my authors and agents, and I don't like it when we're not sort of all on that same team. So I think that's something important. I don't like it when my books don't sell. Yeah. I love finding readers for stories. I think that, certainly every book that I work on, I have a very clear vision of who the reader could be for that specific book, and every book is different. So, I don't like it when a book doesn't find its audience. And so, we always try to course correct and make that happen.
And change the cover.
I don't like it that there's not enough hours in the day, really.
Yep. Yeah,
for
very
sure.
good. Yeah, wow. Okay, well, Wendy, thank you so much for joining us. It's been fantastic to speak with you.
It's been great to speak with you too, Esther.
This was a bonus episode of Oh My Word Podcast featuring Senior Executive Editor Wendy Loggia. To find out more about Wendy and her work, please visit the link in the episode notes. To find out more about Oh My Word Podcast and keep track of all the great stuff we're up to, please follow us on Instagram at Oh My Word Podcast, or check us out at el10about.com. Thanks so much for joining us. Catch you next time.